I thought you didn't have a real job, my mom said, right after opening the envelope with her name on a fully funded college scholarship. No speech, no announcement. Just quiet shock as each guest at our Thanksgiving table realized I had gifted them something they never expected. Hi, I'm Diana, the daughter who was always too quiet, too soft, too invisible, until I wasn't. They thought I'd amounted to nothing, but while they were busy clapping for someone else, I was building something they couldn't ignore, even if they tried. So what happened next? Let's just say the silence at dessert said more than any toast ever could. Before we dive into the story, let me learn a bit about you. If you're a charming lady, please leave the number 1 in the comments. And if you're a dashing gentleman, leave the number 2. This way I can send you a special greeting. Now, let's start the story together. Thanksgiving at my parents' house always came with 2 things: dry turkey and dry praise, for everyone but me. The folding chairs in the backyard still had the same uneven wobble they'd had since 2008, and the plastic tablecloths fluttered under the November wind like they were trying to escape. I pulled into the driveway just before noon with a pecan pie from Whole Foods and a smile I'd rehearsed in the mirror. The smell of stuffing, overcooked green beans, and hairspray met me at the door. Inside, the TV blared with football commentary, and Uncle Marty was already yelling about the Panthers' defensive line like he was paid to care. I waved a quick hello and headed for the kitchen, where my mom was performing her annual symphony of control, stirring, shouting, smiling, and subtly criticizing whoever brought store-bought rolls. "Diana, you're here," she said, voice bright, eyes scanning me head to toe. "Oh, good, you remembered pie." I nodded. "Pecan, your favorite." She didn't answer, already turning to Samantha, who was glowing in a pale pink blouse and holding a bottle of wine, like it was a trophy. "Samantha brought Pinot from that place she found in Napa," Mom beamed. "She says it pairs beautifully with cranberry." I slipped the pie onto the counter beside the others, homemade or at least pretending to be, and took my place at the edge of the kitchen, half invisible. That's where I always ended up. Near enough to be helpful, not enough to be seen. Aunt Karen walked in, purse still over her shoulder. "Diana, still doing that tech from home thing?" I smiled. "Something like that." She nodded like that confirmed something she already believed. "Well, at least you can wear pajamas all day." Uncle Marty chimed in from the living room. "Remember when we thought she'd go into teaching? I mean, you were always quiet. Never really the business type." I laughed lightly. Guess I fooled everyone. Nobody asked what I actually did. Not really. And I didn't offer. I'd learned long ago that information they didn't ask for was often information they'd ignore. Samantha popped the cork and launched into a story about a patient who flew in from Charleston just for a crown replacement. "Can you believe that?" she said. "He said he trusted no one else with his smile." Mom dabbed her eyes with a napkin. "You're building something real, sweetheart. That's what matters, not just busy work on a laptop." I took a sip of cider and let the words settle. They didn't sting like they used to. Not because they were any softer, but because I'd built armor, not walls, just quiet certainty. Dad wandered over, patting my shoulder. "You still fiddling with those charts and dashboards?" he asked. "I remember you had that program once. Looked like a spreadsheet on steroids." "Something like that," I said, keeping my tone gentle. "I still work with data." He nodded approvingly. "Well, that's useful. Somebody's got to know where the money's going." Dinner was called with a flourish. Plates clinked, chairs scraped. We all gathered around 2 long tables squeezed together with mismatched silverware and paper napkins folded to look formal. A roast turkey lay in the center, dry and overcooked, already losing its steam. I found my spot near the end, between 2 cousins who'd barely spoken to me since we were teenagers. As the meal settled into its usual rhythm, gravy jokes, football scores, and the annual debate about marshmallows on sweet potatoes, Helen stood and raised her glass. "Let's take a moment," she said loud enough to hush the room, "to recognize our children. Samantha, of course, for expanding her clinic. We are so proud of you." Applause followed, loud, warm, deserved. I clapped too, not because I had to, because I was proud of her in my own quiet way. Mom continued, "We're lucky to have a daughter who knows where she's going, who's building something solid, something lasting." I lifted my glass and met Samantha's eyes. She smiled sweetly, almost pityingly. No one looked my way. No one mentioned my name. I didn't expect them to. As the laughter faded and the cranberry sauce began to congeal on plates, I reached down under the table and touched the envelope tucked inside my leather bag. Thin, cream-colored, embossed in gold. I had 22 of them, one for each guest, each name spelled exactly right. Each one a quiet answer to the same question they'd never asked. My mom once told me I was too quiet for business. I was 23. That same week, I signed a licensing deal with a logistics software firm in Atlanta worth just over $1 million. I never told her. The morning after Thanksgiving, my townhouse felt like a different world. Light poured through the tall windows, catching on the framed blueprint of Creesview's first interface mock-up. The scent of coffee and leftover pie hung in the air, grounding me in my quiet rhythm. No folding chairs, no small talk about football, just clean lines, working Wi-Fi, and space to think. I stood barefoot in the kitchen, cross-checking names on a whiteboard I'd color-coded the night before. One column for family names, one for donation amounts, one for the schools we'd tied to each fund. I liked structure, not because I needed control, but because I had built too much from chaos to let anything slip now. My laptop pinged. Tina's face popped up on the screen, hair tied up in a red bandana, eyes already sharp despite the early hour. "You look suspiciously rested," she teased. "Thanksgiving detox go okay?" "I survived," I said, reaching for my mug. She grinned. "That bad, huh?" I nodded toward the board. "Ready to review?" We went line by line. Uncle Marty's fund would go to Wake Tech, where he used to brag he almost went back to finish his degree. Aunt Karen's name was attached to a nursing scholarship at Cape Fear Community College. Samantha's, UNC Dental, of course, not petty, just fitting. "And your mom?" Tina asked. I held up a small ivory envelope separate from the stack. "Special message?" I nodded. "One sentence, that's all." I slipped it out and read it again. "Thanks for the motivation." Tina let out a short breath. Brutal. Quietly. "That's the point." She leaned in. "You still sure you want to do this?" "Yes," I said without hesitation. "I'm not showing off. I'm showing up." There had been a time, years ago, when I almost told them everything. It was my cousin's engagement party, one of those Sunday brunches where the mimosas outnumbered the compliments. I'd landed my third round of seed funding that week and brought a modest bottle of champagne to celebrate. Samantha caught sight of it and said, "Diana brought bubbles. Look at you getting festive." Then she laughed and added, "Did someone finally hire you for a real job, or are you just freelancing hope again?" I'd smiled, said nothing, left early, took the bottle home unopened. It wasn't shame, it was self-preservation. There's only so many times you can let someone minimize you before silence feels safer than explanation. Tina brought me back to the present. Media team finished the graphics for the scholarship site. You still want to keep your name off the homepage? For now, I said. Let the impact speak first. We wrapped the call with a final checklist. I watched her name disappear from the screen and stared at the neatly stacked envelopes on the counter. Cream paper, gold ink, no logos, each name printed in full, no abbreviations, no shortcuts. I reached for my purse and slid them in one by one, pressing each down gently, like closing the lid on a gift box. The bag felt heavier than usual, but not in a way that bothered me. Each envelope held more than money. They held a moment, a pause, a mirror. And I wanted them to see exactly what they'd been looking at all these years, without ever seeing me at all. The thing about family traditions is they tend to wrap around you like a blanket, warm and familiar at first, then suffocating if you sit still too long. We'd finished the turkey, the rolls, the casserole with the suspicious crunchy top, and now the cranberry stains on the tablecloth looked like watercolor bruises. Someone had brought gluten-free stuffing again. It sat untouched at the end of the table, much like me. Uncle Reggie cleared his throat and stood up, holding his paper napkin like a handkerchief. "Well, let's go around and say what we're thankful for," he said, beaming. "The usual. Don't be shy now." It was always the same rotation. Kids thankful for video games, aunts thankful for health and family, cousins thankful for promotions or spouses or this year's unexpected baby. One by one, voices bounced off the dining room walls, easy and eager. When it got to my turn, someone sneezed. By the time they recovered and reached for another napkin, Uncle Reggie had already moved on. No one looked my way. I didn't remind them. A beat later, Samantha stood. "I have something," she said, voice lilting, polished. "I'm opening a second practice, Charleston, lease signed last week." The room erupted into claps and toasts and voices talking over each other. Even Helen gasped with delight. "Oh, sweetheart, that's incredible," she said, reaching across the table to squeeze Samantha's hand. "You're becoming such a leader." Someone popped the second bottle of wine. Toasts circled. Praise flowed. I took another bite of over-baked sweet potato and let it dissolve without chewing. Moments like these were never loud because of sound. They were loud because of absence. That familiar hush inside me that said, "Don't bother," that whisper of memory that flickered back to the time I offered to buy my niece a laptop for school, and Samantha said, "Let's wait until someone who understands kids does it." It had been 10 years, but I remembered every word. Helen stood again, tapping her wine glass with a fork. "To our family's shining lights," she said, eyes locked on Samantha. "Some of us chase dreams. Some of us build them. I know which kind I raised." They all lifted their glasses. I didn't. Instead, I reached for mine and stood quietly. The room didn't hush right away. It took a moment, some clinking, a cough, a pause from Uncle Marty mid-story. Then the silence spread, like smoke from an unspoken fire. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. From my purse, I pulled the stack of envelopes. Clean, cream-colored, gold print. One by one, I walked around the table, placing them in front of each person. Some smiled awkwardly, thinking it was a holiday card. Others looked confused. No one reached for theirs. Not yet. When I returned to my seat, I sat without ceremony. No nod, no speech, just a small sip of water and my eyes on Helen. "Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless." She finally picked hers up and opened it. Inside, a simple note, a letterhead, and a certificate. A donation made in her name to the University of North Carolina, earmarked for first-generation college students, fully funded, renewable annually, named after her. I watched her face carefully. She blinked once, then again. Her lips parted slightly. "I thought," she started, voice thinner than usual, "I thought you didn't have a real job." I set my glass down slowly, met her eyes, and said, "Turns out, I had enough to honor you anyway." Across the table, someone cleared their throat. A cousin glanced at his envelope. Frank stared at his with unreadable eyes. No one said anything else. The room remained still, heavy with realization, and for the first time all day, I felt completely seen. There was a moment, right after the last envelope was opened, when time didn't move. Nobody reached for dessert. No one asked for coffee. The only sound was the faint buzz of a candle wick, sputtering near the centerpiece, giving off more smoke than light. For the first time in decades, no one at that table knew what to say, and it was glorious. The silence wasn't angry. It was heavier than that. like the kind you get after a funeral when people try to remember what they used to believe. I sat still in my chair, hands folded in my lap, my water glass untouched. Around me, eyes darted, glances exchanged. Someone coughed. A fork scraped a plate. No one made eye contact for too long. Aunt Marla was the first to break. She leaned forward, smiled tightly, and said, "That was thoughtful, Diana." It was a statement that didn't know what it wanted to be. Gratitude? Confusion? Passive aggression wrapped in linen? I nodded politely. "I'm glad you think so." Uncle Reggie murmured something about legacy and taxes, then went quiet again. He didn't open his envelope right away, just turned it over in his hand like it might say something different on the back. Helen finally spoke. "Well," she said, her voice higher than usual, smile wide but not reaching her eyes, "I had no idea you were doing this sort of thing. Did you win the lottery or something?" Her laugh was airy, brittle. It landed like a dish cracking in the sink. I shook my head slowly. "No lottery." She blinked. "Then where? I mean, how does one just start handing out college funds like party favors?" Before I could answer, Samantha jumped in. "Not that it's not generous," she said quickly, a too bright grin on her face. "It just seems sudden. I mean, there are tax implications, right? Image management, public perception." She was spiraling and didn't know it. Her sentences were polished but uneven, like heels wobbling on uneven pavement. "It's not public," I said, "unless you want it to be." Samantha glanced at Helen, who looked stunned, then back at me. "I'm just saying," she added with forced calm, "some people give quietly." I held her gaze. "And some people only see what's loud." The words landed without echo. Just stillness. Someone at the far end of the table cleared their throat. A cousin asked if there'd be dessert soon. The room felt like it had aged 20 years in 5 minutes. I looked around at all the faces, so many familiar ones that had watched me grow up and assumed they already knew who I was. The girl who stayed home, who typed on a screen, who never wore the right shoes or said the right thing. The one they pitied without asking. So I asked instead. "If Samantha had done this," I said, letting the question settle, "what would you say?" Helen opened her mouth to speak, then closed it, then spoke anyway. "Well, Samantha wouldn't need to prove anything." And there it was, clear, sharper than glass. I smiled, not bitterly, not triumphantly, just calmly. Exactly. For a second, no one moved. Then Frank, who'd barely spoken all afternoon, cleared his throat. His voice was quiet, but it reached across the table like a hand placed gently on the shoulder. "I didn't know," he said. I turned to him, measured, not unkind. "You never asked." And that was it. That was the turning point. Not the money, not the envelopes, just that one sentence. One man realizing that silence isn't neutral, it's complicit. One woman no longer interested in filling it with explanations. The stuffing on the table had gone cold. The candles were nearly out. Somewhere in the kitchen, the dishwasher clicked off. No one reached for seconds. No one asked for pie. They were full of questions they'd never thought to ask. The table had been cleared, but the weight in the room remained untouched. The chairs were empty now, pushed in unevenly, napkins left crumpled like quiet flags of surrender. The last few guests shuffled out with murmured goodbyes and half-meant compliments, voices softer than they'd been hours ago. No one lingered at the dessert table. No one asked for coffee to go. I stood near the edge of the backyard, coat folded over one arm, keys in hand. The November air had turned crisp. The smell of leftover stuffing and candle wax clung faintly to my sweater. Behind me, the porch light buzzed, the kind of faint hum you only notice when everything else goes still. Frank came out a few minutes later. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets like he wasn't quite sure what to do with them. "You heading out?" he asked, already knowing the answer. I nodded. "Long day." He gave a small smile. Yeah, it was." We stood there for a moment side by side, but not quite close. He glanced at the car, then at the ground. I waited. No lecture, no apology. Just a man working his way through a silence he hadn't earned, but carried anyway. He cleared his throat once, then said, "You've done well." There was no weight on the words, just a simple observation, like commenting on the weather. I looked at him and offered something softer than a smile. "Thank you." From the porch, I could feel eyes on me. I turned slightly and saw Samantha standing in the doorway, arms crossed over her chest, the shadows cutting across her face in angles. She didn't speak, but her expression wasn't the same as it had been before. There was something hesitant there. Not quite admiration, not quite envy, something in between, recognition maybe, or the discomfort of seeing a story you've always believed suddenly rewritten. She held my gaze, then looked away. My phone buzzed. It was Tina. "Hey," I said, stepping a few paces toward the driveway. "You're not going to believe this," she said, the excitement in her voice barely contained. 3 different families posted about their envelopes. The posts are already circulating. 2 college counselors reached out about collaborating. 1 local news anchor is asking for a quote. I laughed lightly. "Did we break the internet?" "Just bent it a little." "Oh, and the scholarship site's traffic tripled in 2 hours. I could hear her typing in the background. "You okay?" she asked. "I'm good," I said. "Quiet night." There was a pause. Then Tina asked, "Still want to stay anonymous?" "For now. Let them talk about the gift, not the giver." "And next year?" she asked. I looked up at the sky, clear and black and full of stars. "Next year," I said, "we double the fund." We said goodnight and I ended the call. As I reached the car, I turned one last time. Helen was at the window, not moving, just watching, her face partially hidden behind a curtain, her posture as straight as ever. No wave, no nod, no word. We stared at each other across the glass. Years ago, after my first failed pitch, she'd told me, "Some people just aren't built to lead." I'd believed her for a long time, until I didn't. I got in the car and started the engine. The headlights lit up the driveway like a theater curtain rising for the final act. No one came out to stop me. No one tried to explain, and that was okay. Some endings aren't about closure. They're about clarity. By the time I reached home, the porch light had clicked on automatically. A white FedEx envelope leaned neatly against the door. I picked it up and turned it over. Forbes. I didn't send a Christmas card. I sent them a magazine. It was a quiet morning, 2 days before Christmas. Snow hadn't fallen yet, but the sky outside my office window hinted at it, pale gray and low like a held breath. I sipped hot tea from a ceramic mug and let the scent of cinnamon and orange fill the air. Somewhere in the corner, jazz played soft and slow. Ella Fitzgerald, if I wasn't mistaken. The Forbes issue sat on my desk, thick, matte. The cover showed me standing against the window wall of Cresview's main conference suite, my arms crossed, eyes steady. The headline read, "The Quiet Architect of Change, How Diana Layton Rewrote the Rules Without Saying a Word." I didn't need to read the article again. I'd lived every line. The sleepless years, the contracts negotiated over broken Wi-Fi in a borrowed apartment, the first hire, the first firing, the nights I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I wasn't built for this, but they were wrong. Tina walked in with a short stack of padded envelopes. She wore a cable-knit sweater and carried the scent of peppermint with her. 10 copies sealed and ready, she said, placing them gently on the table. Addresses confirmed. "No note," I said. She nodded. "Just the truth, then." I looked down at one of the envelopes. It had Helen and Frank's address in black ink, printed clean and without flourish. It was the same house I'd grown up in, the one with the rusted mailbox and the creaky porch swing no one ever fixed. "Send them today," I said. "They'll arrive by the 24th. Tina smiled. "Merry quiet Christmas." Exactly. That afternoon, somewhere across town, Helen opened the front door to find a nondescript package resting on the welcome mat. She didn't recognize the sender. There was no return address, just her name. Clean, spelled right. She brought it inside, tore the seal slowly, and pulled the magazine out. I wasn't there to see her reaction, but I could imagine it. Her sitting at the kitchen table in that robe she wore every December, hands brushing over the cover like it might speak. Frank would have come in from the living room, reading glasses already on, a crossword forgotten in his lap. "She looks like your mother," he might have said, looking at the photo. The strength. Helen wouldn't answer, not out loud. That night, I left the office just after 6. The lights downtown sparkled white and gold, the kind that made even the traffic lights look festive. I walked home in the cold, coat zipped up, hands deep in my pockets. When I got in, the apartment smelled like pine and quiet. The phone buzzed once, a single text. I didn't understand then. I do now. "Mom." I stared at the screen for a long time. Then I locked the phone, set it down face down, and said nothing. Some things don't need a reply. Some things, when they finally arrive, aren't meant to be spoken into. I poured a glass of water, took a seat by the window, and pulled out my notebook. On the top of a clean page, I wrote, "Success didn't need their permission, only my own." Then I closed the notebook. Outside, soft flakes had started to fall, slow, sure, and unannounced. Sometimes the loudest thing you can do is stay quiet and let the work speak. That morning, watching the snow fall and my name in print, I felt no need to explain, prove, or correct the story others had written for me. Maybe the lesson is this: love doesn't always look like praise, and silence doesn't always mean someone has nothing to say. If we listen better and ask with real interest, we might discover strength where we least expected it. If this story reminded you of someone in your life or a moment when you stood quietly in your truth, I'd love to hear about it. Your reflections matter, maybe even more than applause.